there's some assumptions around professional learning that are embedded in the standards. And one of those is educator learning. And being responsible, those that are responsible for professional learning, really being able to concentrate their efforts on assuring that learning for educators leads to learning for students. So that's the number one assumption. The second is that educator effectiveness piece. When professional learning incorporates the indicators of effectiveness defined for each role or position, educator effectiveness and student learning increases. So really being able to connect back to the outcome standard by emphasizing the focus on effective indicators defined for each role. So really being able to look at each educator's position, their role, and what are the effective indicators, the effectiveness indicators for their position, and then what professional learning is needed to be able to connect with those indicators. And then the third is that the core purpose of professional learning is to increase the effectiveness and equity of education for all students and excellence in educator learning, so that your student, or my husband's a principal, so for every parent who comes to his school and says, I want the best teacher you have, he has some assurance in saying all of my teachers have the same quality of instruction because they all work together, they all learn together, that one teacher isn't any better than the other. And if we could also do that for every school in a district and every district in a state, how that changes the entire equity conversation. So let's talk about these prerequisites. As we think about these 4 prerequisites, I think they really capture this conversation around the assumptions. Is these prerequisites really address the intersection between professional learning and ethics, professional ethics. And while we recognize that it may be necessary to address these prerequisites while also working to implement the standards. But these are kind of some fundamental ideas around what's necessary for professional learning to even be effective. So one of those is really looking at educators' commitment, and that being able to engage in continuous improvement to gain the knowledge and skills necessary to meet the learning needs of the students that I have today. Not the students I had last year or the students I used to have when I started, but am I constantly, continuously engaging in professional learning to be able to meet the needs of the students that I have right now today? So it's that commitment and being able to look at being able to see if that adults are ready to learn. And that's such a huge piece, is being able to have adults that are open to new learning and open to receive the knowledge, skills, practices, and dispositions that are necessary. And professional learning cannot be effective if educators resist learning. So that's something we also have to keep in our minds. And also being able to look at the inquiry and collaboration process and being able to see whether or not there are opportunities for collaboration vertically, horizontally, and whether or not we provide those opportunities for those things to happen. And then the final one is to be able to to recognize that just as we are so willing to accept that students learn in different ways and different rates, so is the case for our adults. And being able to think about all the different ways we might help educators through their professional learning, and at the rate that we do that is such an important element as well. This is probably one of the most helpful visual representations of the link between professional learning and student achievement. And when you look at this diagram, 1 through 4, it gives you the way to talk about how professional learning is linked to student achievement, starting with a professional learning that then moves to educators changing their knowledge, skills, and dispositions, which then leads to the third step, which someone mentioned, is the part that may be missing, which is the change in practice. And it's that change in practice that changes student learning. The nice thing about this diagram is as we think about planning, you can use it to do the reverse. So if you think about 4, that if you want to look at changes in student learning and you identify what those changes are, you are able to think about step 3. So then what are the changes in educators that we need to be able to enhance? What knowledge, skills, dispositions do the educators need? And then in part 2, we start to dissect that into each of those elements that then we're able to plan the professional learning. So it gives us an opportunity to really think a little more strategically and be more intentional and deliberate when we're thinking about the whole purpose of professional learning.